Well, thanks so much for being here. Today we're here to introduce the State Health Care Choice Act. You know, during the State of the Union, the President said, quote, "If you have ideas about how to improve this law by making care better or more affordable," he said, "I'm eager to work with you." Well, today we have ideas that we're bringing here today that will lower costs and will improve care. As both a doctor and a former state senator in the state of Wyoming, I witnessed regularly how Washington simply didn't understand the needs of the people in our state. And after Obamacare, to me, Washington seems more out of touch than ever. People all across the country are telling President Obama and telling Washington to take their hands off of the people's health care. 7 states, you know, have already passed laws or constitutional amendments making it illegal to force Americans to buy health insurance. 26 states have filed lawsuits challenging the legality, the constitutionality of the law. And you know, yesterday, Judge Vinson in Florida declared the law to be unconstitutional. This is now, to me, the second dagger into the heart of Obamacare. The states have made it clear they don't like the law and they can't afford it. Former governor of Tennessee, a Democrat, Phil Bresden, said that the health care law, in terms of Medicaid expansion, was the mother of all unfunded mandates. So Washington might ignore the American people. Washington might ignore the states, but Senator Graham and I will not. And that's why today we're introducing the State Health Care Choice Act. This State Health Care Choice Act provides a path to freedom for our states. And specifically, it allows states to voluntarily opt out of portions of the health care law. The portions on the individual mandate, the employer mandate and the penalties, Medicaid expansion in the states, and insurance benefit mandates. So instead of requiring states to follow Obamacare's one-size-fits-all approach to health care policy, our bill lets states decide what works best for their citizens. Governors, state legislators, and state insurance commissioners each have much greater insight into what works for their citizens and what does not. Our bill gives the states the sovereignty to pursue their own reform ideas and approaches. The states want their freedom. They want their flexibility. Our bill gives it to them. It offers the flexibility needed to generate better health care solutions, solutions that do not require the states to follow a Washington plan that will ultimately bankrupt them. We're going to work hard for this. We're going to work with governors, with state legislators, to make sure that states have the freedom and the flexibility that they need because they know what's best for their own citizens. Senator Graham.
The way I would describe this is we're opening up a third front in the challenges to Obama health care. The first front is the lawsuit in courts. Different states are filing lawsuits in federal court challenging the constitutionality of the individual mandate. The House passed a repeal of the Obama health care bill in total. That's a front. That bill is now in the Senate. Senator DeMint and I think about every Republican will vote for the repeal and replace the House version. This is a third front. This takes the battle out of Washington to the states. Under our legislation, a state legislature, with approval of the governor of that state, can opt out of the individual mandate, the employer mandate, and Medicaid expansion. And let me tell you why I think that makes sense. In my state of South Carolina, if Obama health care becomes fully implemented by 2014, 29% of the citizens of the state of South Carolina will be Medicaid eligible because the eligibility requirements now go up to 150% above poverty. That means $1 billion of additional matching money has to be found by the state of South Carolina in the next 7 years. The second largest budget expense already in South Carolina at the state level is Medicaid matching funds. This would bankrupt the state of South Carolina. This is something we can't afford, and there has to be a better way of insuring low-income Americans than putting states like South Carolina into bankruptcy. This year, the state legislature is having to cut $830 million out of the budget to get it in balance because of a constitutional requirement to balance the budget in South Carolina. If you added another $1 billion of federal mandates through Medicaid expansion, it would be impossible for my state to get out of its economic woes. So it takes the fight from Washington to each state. And if your state legislature and your state governor likes Obamacare as it is, you can stay in the system. But you can opt out. And to me, if we had this debate throughout the states, it would be easy for me to envision a majority of the states opting out of Obamacare within a year. What would be the effect of them opting out? The bill would fall, and we'd have to replace it with something that made more sense. So I look forward to, if we're going to vote on naming a post office this year, you're going to be voting on this. We're going to bring this up every time we can to make sure that the Senate is on record as to whether or not states should have the ability to opt out and choose their own path when it comes to Obama health care. I think this will be an issue for the 2012 election cycle, and if we play our cards right, I think we've got a 50-50 chance of changing the Medicaid provisions, because Democratic governors in big states are just as upset with the Medicaid problems as governors in red states like Governor Haley in South Carolina.
Senator Barrasso,
Yes.
are you going to offer this as an amendment to the FAA bill?
We're going to work on the strategy, but they're going to continue to have opportunities to vote to give states the chance to opt out. Yes.
I'm just curious how this would work. If the state opted out, would the people in the state still be eligible then for the federal subsidies to purchase insurance, or would they no longer be eligible for those subsidies?
The states are going to have an opportunity to opt out of different components of this, all four components. Those people are still paying taxes.
Would they get the federal subsidies to purchase?
People are still paying taxes, and we're working out the details of that part of it. There'll be additional bills coming in terms of Medicaid money to the states, and as people continue to pay taxes, they're not going to give up that right to have an opportunity to use that money. Yes.
Right now, senators can ask for waivers to the states. Senators from are doing this. Why is that not sufficient? I guess Senator Graham explained this is a way to attack the bill fundamentally. But why is it not sufficient for states to get waivers and develop their own comprehensive systems instead of opting out of the parts of it?
States will have an opportunity to opt out of any of the four parts of it, the individual mandate, the employer mandate, the Medicaid expenses, as well as the level of coverage. And what you saw was some of the waivers that have been given by Secretary Sebelius. That has to do with the amount of coverage given. As we've seen, they've now given over 2 million waivers over the last couple of months, many to unions who had actually come in and supported the bill in the first place. This is basically giving the states the right to come up with a plan that works best for them and works best for all of their citizens. Yes.
Senator Graham, if I may, you mentioned that many states, that South Carolina will be affected by this. Did you actually have a conversation with Governor Haley about this?
Yes.
The direct result of why you are here?
Well, remember the conversation she had with President Obama. Governor-elect Haley asked the question, I think it's sort of your question, your two questions combined. Could we find a better way of doing this, Mr. President? The structure you provided, we think, is overreaching, oppressive, is going to lead to higher cost, and the whole issue is cost. And the President indicated that he would work with her. Well, the difference between a waiver and what we're doing is that you have to get approval from Labor HHS if you're a state to change the system, and it has to fit within the general confines of the Obama construct. Our bill would say you can chart your own destiny. You don't have to go back to Labor HHS. When it comes to the individual mandate, people in South Carolina would not be fined, because if you chose not to have health care in South Carolina and our state opted out, the federal fines would not follow you. Would a state exchange be created for individual purchases? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. If you took half the states out of the individual mandate requirement, this bill falls, requiring us to draft something new. And quite frankly, that is the goal, is to find a way to get the Congress to redo this bill. And I can't think of a better way than have the people speak at the state level as to what they would like or not like.
Well, if I may quickly follow
Yeah.
up, sir, to play devil's advocate, if this bill passes as written,
Right.
essentially, the other side would say that what would happen is the status quo would be preserved. The status quo has not been.
Well, here's what I would say to my friends on the other side. You didn't listen to any of us when we had ideas. This guy is really smart about health care. I think he understands the status quo is not good. Status quo is not good in South Carolina. We have a lot of people who are uninsured and underinsured. There's a way, you know, Senator DeMint and myself came up with an idea to allow every American to purchase health care in the private sector with a tax credit. And you could buy health care across state lines. Medical malpractice reform would lower cost. The whole idea of improving access and lowering cost is still a national goal. This bill consolidates power in the federal government. It increases taxes at a time we can't afford it. It compromises Medicare. And the end result of this bill is to force people into government-subsidized health care. My goal is to create more opportunity in the private sector, not less. So the status quo is unacceptable because costs are too high for too many Americans. The solution in this bill has taken the problem in the wrong direction, and if states could speak, I am confident that a majority of Americans through their state legislature, if they had the chance, would opt out of these provisions. And we'll never know till we have that vote. And to my colleagues in the Senate, give the people you represent a chance to speak. You may be surprised as to what they have to say.
Hey, Dana. Yeah.
And I'll let other people talk if other people have questions on healthcare, but may I ask you a question on Egypt?
Sure.
Okay. Just to get your thoughts on the situation, or more specifically, how the Obama administration has been handling it, and what you think with regard to President Mubarak, should he leave? Should he say he will?
For 30 years, this country has pursued a relationship with the Mubarak government that's been beneficial in terms of stability. For 30 years, we've been urging his government to allow his people to have more freedom, a better way of life. He has entered into, he validated the peace treaty with Israel. The military relationship between the United States and the Egyptian military is solid and good. So President Mubarak has been a moderating influence when it comes to U.S. interest and I think stability in the regime. But those days are coming to an end, because his presence is no longer a moderating influence. What you see in the streets of Cairo are young people, people of all backgrounds, asking for the government of Egypt to change. The dilemma the United States has here and in other places is, how much do we want stability? I think it would be a mistake for the United States to not side with the Egyptian people's legitimate hopes and desires of having a free and fair election to choose their own leaders and to chart a different destiny. One thing to the protesters: you're on the verge of creating a new Egypt. I understand what you want because we assume it and accept it and almost take it for granted here. The idea of being able to choose your leaders, to be able to live in a society where you don't have to fear the police, is something every American should stand behind. But to the young women and to the young men in that square, if you do have free and fair elections in September, I hope you'll be wise enough and brave enough to say no to forces within your country, radical Islamic forces that would take your future and make it as dark as it is today. So my acknowledgement of the legitimate needs of the Egyptian people, it's time for our country to embrace those needs. But we also need to urge those who follow the Mubarak government, if it's replaced, to choose wisely. Because if this new government is a more radical government that is going to undermine the peace process and create a launching pad for other radical movements, what good have we accomplished? So the Egyptian people not only have the right to form a new government, they have the responsibility to make sure it's done in a way to go toward the light, not back to the darkness.
When you say the U.S. should side with the Egyptian people, can you be more specific? What are you trying to say?
I think it is clear to me that the current situation is unsustainable. Their elections are being held, scheduled in September. Now would be a good time to try to work with the Egyptian people to find an interim government that would be legitimate in the eyes of the Egyptian people, that new parties could be formed to participate in a national election in September that would be free, transparent, beyond corruption, to chart a new destiny for the Egyptian people. The concern from an American perspective, who would make up that government? I think it would be wise for us to be on the ground floor of helping this transition rather than having a totally hands-off policy.
Well, Why don't we get back to healthcare, and then we can continue. Then we can continue with that at the end of this. Yeah,
that's right.
The healthcare. Yes.
Back to healthcare, you mentioned earlier about the process. Have you talked to Leader McConnell about getting this on the calendar? How it's going to work? Is it going to be with Obamacare repeal?
The number one goal is to repeal and replace this health care law. That's the number one goal. That's what we're pushing to get a vote on. If Senator Reid is so proud of this piece of legislation, then you would think he would welcome that vote. That's where the focus is. The bottom line is what we're trying to accomplish here for the American people is we want people to get the care they need from the doctors they want at a price they can afford. And we know that Obamacare doesn't do that. It doesn't allow people to get the care they need from the doctor they want at the cost they can afford. So that's why we're bringing this law. And you talked about your own state. I mean, in Wyoming, editorial in our local paper, repeal of Obamacare would help Wyoming. And we know that we can provide care a lot cheaper in Wyoming than all of the mandates that come out. This was written by a state senator who continues to chair our health committee in Wyoming. I served on the committee with Charlie Scott. He was a member of the Jackson Hole Group over the years that looked to lower the cost of care. When we talk about governors in what states, you just turn to Saturday's New York Times, and the number one picture there is Jerry Brown. And the number two picture under him is Andrew Cuomo, and the huge expenses and mandates on these states. And what works in their states won't necessarily work in our states. And all you need to go and take a look at the article. States have already cut payments to healthcare providers and scaled back benefits over the last few years, so these new proposed cuts from these governors are much more painful. They go on to the fact that this is actually they call it a pivotal moment, a tenuous moment for the Obama administration because of the additional mandates. The president talks about coverage, and we talk about care. And there is a huge disconnect between coverage and care, and the president sometimes interchanges those words. But to give somebody a Medicaid card, as they're doing, cramming 16 million more Americans onto Medicaid, isn't providing them care when doctors won't take care of them, and we know that this is a system that will cause hospitals to go bankrupt. So that's why we're bringing this, to let states decide what works best for them, because the people of Wyoming know what's going to work best for them, and it's not Obamacare. Are you all the way in the back?
Senator Barrasso, can you just tell us, I know Ben Nelson earlier today was support for this measure, but what is your outreach to some of the more moderate Democrats that might be open to this issue? And then in particular thinking about I believe Senator Wyden was originally talking about this type of provision, but what's the outreach to Democrats?
And we had visited with Senator Wyden. He has introduced a separate bill with Scott Brown because he wants to move a date from 2017 to 2014. We can get into the specifics of that. That doesn't give the states the options to opt out. That just says they have to live under Obamacare and they can then run it themselves, but it's still all of the criteria of Obamacare is there. The mandates, the levels, the overinsurance to people that either can't afford it or don't want it or choose not to do that. So this really gives freedom and flexibility to the states that Senator Wyden does not. But we're going to continue to reach out to members on both sides of the aisle to get as many co-sponsors because we think there's going to be significant support for this because their own governors, regardless of party, governors are going to come to their senators and say, we'd like to have this opportunity for our state. We can do it cheaper than Washington.
If I can add to that, we're going to send a dear colleague letter and ask each senator to join forces with us to get a vote on the floor to allow the states to opt out. But I think the weak point in this bill from a national perspective is Medicaid expansion. As Senator Barrasso indicated, there are Democratic governors very concerned about what it would mean to their state for Medicaid to expand dramatically. In my state, 29% of the people in South Carolina would be Medicaid eligible because you've increased the eligibility requirements to 150% above poverty. California, Texas, New York, these large states, that would put them into bankruptcy with no way out. So I'm confident, quite frankly, this idea will grow because it allows a senator to hear from the people they represent. And look at the political combinations here. What happens when you got a Republican governor and two Democratic senators? You got one Democrat, one Republican senator with a Democratic governor. The reason I like this approach, it takes the debate that's been an academic behind-the-door closed environment debate here in Washington. That's the way the bill was passed, and it pushes it to the state level. I could imagine state legislatures petitioning the Congress to allow them to opt out. The politics of this is without limit. It takes the debate from Washington and it makes it part of every state house race in the country in 2012. It makes it part of every governor's campaign in 2012. And this is exactly what's been missing in the past. A robust debate outside of Washington. This bill, this opt-out provision, will take health care to the streets of America, not just the streets of Washington.
Last other option, Senator?
Yes.
If states were to take this on, it would significantly reduce the number of people that the bill covers, people would get insurance. Is there any alternative to try to get those people covered?
We're going to continue to work for the replacement part of the health care law. You know, Speaker Boehner has tasked members in his party, in his caucus, to do that and to come up with solutions. We've continued to give recommendations, you know, things like making it legal for people to buy insurance across state lines. People talk about, or the University of Minnesota study shows that there'd be about 12 million more people insured today if you can do that. Ways that allow individuals who buy their own health insurance to have the same tax advantages as when they get it through work. Talked about actually giving patient-centered incentives that aren't in the health care law. Talking about getting rid of junk lawsuits, which continue to increase the cost of care. We know that the big fundamental problem is the cost of care in this country. This health care law, Obamacare, does not in any reasonable, reliable way deal with the explosive cost of care. The President has said that the insurance premiums would go down by over $2,500 per family. The people all across the country continue to see their premiums going up. The cost of their care is going up. It's significantly cutting into their abilities. We know this is hurting ability to get people hired. It's a job-crushing expense. The incentives are not there. The consequences are very large, and I think if we get the costs under control, we can do a much better job of covering more people. Thank you very much.
That if you put this bill out there without these cost controls, you can't have states just dropping the mandate, because then you're shrinking the risk pool and costs go up. So don't you have to do some of these things you're talking about before you put legislation on the floor?
No. You hit the point. We want this bill to come to an end. You're right. If 50% of the states opt out, the pool goes down, the individual mandate fails. That's exactly what I think will happen and should happen, requiring us to start over. The goal is to repeal and replace. And you got to ask yourself this question. Why are 26 states suing the federal government if they didn't believe there was a problem with this bill? I guarantee you that if you took the debate out of Washington to the states, the opt-out provision would pass overwhelmingly in half the states within 6 months.
Don't you have to have cost controls here before you allow states?
You know what we have to have? A debate where Democrats and Republicans are in the same room, where you're not buying votes to get the 60th vote, where you're not meeting behind closed doors on Christmas Eve and jamming through a bill that affects 1/5 of the economy using Chicago-style sleazy politics. The way this bill passed is a direct result of the way it's being received. So if you started over, yes, there would be pressure on the Republican Party to find solutions to cost and coverage. But the way this bill became law was the worst of Washington, and I'm going to do everything I can to bring it down and start over using a process that we all could be proud of, leading to a result that does what this senator wants. This is a smart man who understands health care far better than I. He and the rest of us basically were shut out. We took a vote on Christmas Eve to pass this thing a couple of years ago, and the rest is history. So now I want to get this debate out of Washington, onto the streets of the states of this country, listen to the people, and start over. You got it right. My hope is that the people will tell the Congress this is a bad product, start over.
Thank you very much.